Okay, so let me show you a video of SQL injections. So apologies for, okay, so now look at it. Okay, so anyone got an idea what happened? Yep.
Just change the username from can either be admin or a simple 1 equals 1.
Yep. So can you interpret?
1 always passes.
Yeah. So what happens by using that? First of all, let me turn on the laser. What's happening? Short keys are not working anymore. You can see the cursor. Okay. So admin accounts normally exist in any database. So what I initially did is start with admin. Okay, and then this code basically is added over here to terminate the string. Okay, it terminates the string, and then it added or 1 is equal to 1. So in short, and these two comments basically these two lines basically use as to add comments in SQL language. So whatever is afterwards over here would be considered as a comments, and it will not get executed in the database. In fact, it will not go to database when SQL command is being generated. So in short, the original string which was which was basically to look at username and password, it did look at the username. Now whether username exists or not, it doesn't matter, because we have OR condition, and second condition we have 1 is equal to 1, which will always be true. So in this case, no matter what happens, this query will get executed, and you will be able, the record set will get a result, no matter what the result it would be. It would be any first result if there is no limit over here, and application will understand this as the user is legitimate, and access would be given to the user. Okay. So this was the issue over here. So what we need to do is, whenever we have to concatenate these variables which are coming from the form, we need to validate them. We need to check them before putting them in SQL string. Okay, this will help us to identify whether the command is legitimate or not, whether user is trying to use some specific characters to terminate a string or not. Okay, if we do that, then we will be able to stop SQL injections. So frameworks that will be used, definitely most of the time they basically address these scenarios. They does not allow user to use the string directly into SQL statements. In most of the frameworks, you basically build SQL statements, and through methods you assign values to these variables. Okay, I'm sure there's any. Okay, we can go back now. So being
You could
implemented.
also put that injection on the password so you could get into a specific user account.
Sorry, can you elaborate? I didn't get it.
Just by putting appending concatenating one password attempt would also allow you to get into a specific user account. So the account
Yeah.
is correct, but the password is always correct because you've appended or concatenated.
Yeah, first check is it should not allow any special characters or one equal to one something. And secondly, username should be, make sure the username also exists. So yeah, so this is to further add on it. Sorry. So frameworks are very useful in this regard because, yeah, okay, laser is back. So they have built-in security over there. They would have design patterns, they have security precautionary measures being implemented, and you are trying to reuse them. And you would be forced to follow that structure, follow those rules and guidelines. Extensibility. You can easily extend them. As I mentioned, you can create your own specialized classes. You can extend a framework to create your own framework that you can use to build application. Okay, so the extensibility is over there. Fast loading, cache capabilities. These frameworks basically provide some. They basically provide certain modules that can cache some specific functionality, so that performance of applications can increase. Usability is there, flexibility is there, and clean URLs. For example, in case of frameworks that implement MVC pattern, modern view controller pattern. If you are implementing views, then your URL will basically, instead of having product something with number, your URL will contain product view, product A view, product B view, product name, and so on. And it will helps the search engine to better optimize their searching. Your URLs will be easily may get higher ranking in search engine because through URL they are able to compare what user is asking for. So this increase the readability as well as search engine are able to better utilize these URLs to give more refined results to the users. So there are many advantages associated with the frameworks we're using. So those frameworks were regarding programming languages to code some business logic. Now we know that today we build web applications that people can browse from laptop, desktop, maybe tablets and mobiles. So these different devices had different dimensions. Okay, so initially people started building separate web app for mobiles and separate web applications that can be accessed through desktop. But HTML provides you a feature that you can design one interface that will be accessible no matter what device client is trying to use. Okay, your interface get adjusted according to dimension of the device, screen of the device. So Bootstrap is a framework that basically provides some predefined functionality that you can use to build your graphical user interface. It has some JavaScript. Can you see? This is a CSS file, and a couple of them are JavaScript files. Using these CSS and JavaScript files, you can basically define very dynamic web pages, the intuitive web pages. For example, if you look over here, these are the three divs, okay, div tag, and they are represented as column over here. And if screen resolution changes, goes from this to this one, then they will be reorganized as a rows. Nothing needs to be changed in the code, okay, because JavaScript is over there. JavaScript identify the screen size, screen resolution. Accordingly, adjustment would be done. So layout will change. You don't need to change any code. Okay. In HTML5, there are well-defined layouts. Okay, top would be header, left would be navigation, footer would be there, and article would be in center. You can define it this layout in HTML5. Okay. So Bootstrap provides you this flexibility. So in your assessments, if you know about CSS, JavaScript, if you include these, you can see the effect. Okay. Now coming back to our main topic, which is understanding the mainline logical flow through a program. We all know that the context we are working in, we as a developer, we need to understand what the customer wants, who is basically paying you against certain project, and what the user's needs are. because the goals could be different. This guy want to achieve something with minimum investment, whereas user wants something perfect that can help him in doing the task. And you, being a developer, your role is to basically identify and try to define the project that can be done within the goals being defined by the customer, and it also fulfills what is the need of the end user. So you need to understand the need, and then you need to deliver the software. So in understanding this need, you being a developer has to understand what is the logical mainline flow of your program. Okay, so what your program will do, and what would be the sequence of doing this. What would be inside of the program, what would be outside of the program, because this user comes with a certain context. This slide will make more sense to you. System boundary is very critical. Today my system is not behaving well now. Cursor is not moving. But anyway, no, it's not. It might need to restart. So system boundary. Okay, now it's moving. System boundary is very critical. Being a developer, when you're trying to identify the main line flow of your application, you're trying to define the system boundary. What would be input to the system? For example, this is a simple payroll system where pay information will come. Your software needs to validate the date, do some calculation, print the invoices, and they will be posted to the user. So this is a business scenario, and this is a system boundary. So in system boundary, you need to identify what would be input to your system, what you need to validate, what calculations you need to perform, and what you need to do after that, and how your system will interface with the external world or other systems, because this pay information might be coming from other information systems. So what would be the interfaces between your systems and other systems or external world, and what steps would be performed. So this is your mainline logical flow. Okay, so if you are able to define this, then you are able to better address the user needs. So that's why it's very important to understand what are the goals and try to ask questions in order to clarify your thinking, clarify your logical design. And one way of doing that is designing the web pages first. So in web applications, one of the technique which industry use is that if user is asking for some, providing some requirement, asking for some business, sharing business problem with you, and you might have some application already you have built in order to address that scenario for some other client, you can show those web pages to the client, and client can tell you, okay, this is exactly what I need. This is one way. By using existing web applications, you can show it to your client, and you can gather the requirements. What would be different in your scenario that is not being addressed by this web application. Second is you can generate a very dummy graphical user interface in order to gather the requirements. You can show to the client that, okay, these forms would be we will build, and they will capture this information, and client can tell you, okay, on this form I need this information as well. I remove this information field from the form, and so on. So through this activity, you are trying to understand the requirements of the user, and on one side you are understanding the requirement, or second, and side by side you are trying to finalize the forms as well. Once graphical user interface is finalized, you know what would be information, what would be the input for your software to compute. Okay, so understand what the goals are, and using different tactics like showing graphical user interface or building dummy graphical user interface, the flow, the wizard, you can capture the requirement. You can understand what client is asking for. And form is one thing. You are capturing data to that form, and you are doing computation on that data, and again you will be printing certain reports. So data dictionaries are very critical. So you need to build this information. What data is required? What sort of form fields you would require in order to capture that data, and how that data will be saved in the database. These things should be synchronized, as we discussed in the last lecture as well. There should be well-defined mapping between these three things. Your data dictionary will be used to develop forms, web forms, as well as your backend database. So we are trying to understand the bigger pictures, and what we mean by that, we are trying to understand what would be the input to our system. Okay, because eventually we have to produce certain output, and output needs some report where we need to basically show the transaction on daily basis, but the data we captured is not on daily basis, it may be monthly report. Then we will not be able to generate the final report. So through this understanding, we need to ensure that the information we are getting would be able to would be enough to give us to help us to produce the final output which is being required. So we understand the input, then we design the business logic, what steps need to be done, and then we go and start coding, which is application of business logic. And if you see over here, we start our main logic program, we do some housekeeping, how variables should be defined, then we start reading the files, and through certain conditional variables we can identify how long our main logic should continue to flow, and within that we call different modules to compute something and so on. So in this case, especially the payroll example, information would be read from the maybe another software, then calculations would be done, then printing would be done. If when all records are being processed, program will terminate. Okay. So that was regarding the overall main logical flow which we need to understand in our programs. Now good design is very critical, and we have been emphasizing this since the first lecture. Why it's important? Because we divide the problem into small sections, into small chunks, which we can solve on their own individually. And once we have solutions for those small problems, we can basically plug them together, those solutions, and we can get solution for entire system. Okay, we know the advantages of doing this. Multiple people can work on single module. Teams need to define the interfaces. Interfaces are well defined. Then they can easily plug the modules together, and so on. Another advantage which we achieve when we are able to follow this design approach, divide and conquer, we can test the module separately, the solution separately. For example, this is solution 1. Whatever we have codified in the solution, we can test it separately from entire application. We don't need to wait for entire application to be configured together in order to test this module. So testing becomes very easy. Okay. In addition to advantages which we discussed in last lecture, one of the biggest advantages of following these approaches, you can test your solutions, the modules, separately from entire application. Okay. And in bigger, large projects, this is very critical. Large projects takes time to complete. Okay. A lot of manpower is involved. So you don't wait for entire application to be configured together, all modules would be plugged in together, and then you test the application. There will be application level testing, but you have unit level testing, which is these modules, in order to ensure when entire application is being tested, these modules should be delivering what is expected from them. So this becomes very important when we do testing of the systems. So application environment is very critical. We are building an application. We know how to structure the program. We know how to design the logic. We know how to implement the logic. But important thing is, what are the important criteria you need to select for environment in which you will be building your application? Okay. Being a developer, you would have some certain skill set. You may be good in PHP, or you may be good in ASP.NET. And it's not like that. If clients come to you and ask you that this is my problem, give me a solution, you say I will give you a solution, but it will be in .NET. It will not be like that. Industry, you may be working on different languages at the same time. Okay, you may be working on classic ASP as well as ASP.NET. Okay, so this is not like that. Whenever problem is brought to you, you have your say. In fact, you have to look at the task, what task demands, and what capabilities client have in their premises, and so on. So what are important decisions you need to, important considerations you need to take into account is what is the environment on which this web application will run. And we all know different platforms would require different set of capabilities in order to run the application. Okay, Apache web server cannot run ASP.NET web application. Okay, IIS, Microsoft web server, will not run PHP applications because they are proprietary in nature. Okay, so we need to understand what sort of environment this application will be deploying. What language will be used? Again, it depends upon the task. nature of application and the support available, what database is required. If it is a very large application, maybe Oracle is required, but if small to medium scale application, maybe MySQL would be enough. What are the hosting applications? Right now you are hosting your web applications on your local machine. You have web server, you have application server installed on your machine, and you can build your application. But you have to host these applications somewhere so that larger community, then enterprise can access it. So what options do you have where you can host these websites? So what options are available to the people? So we need to take those things into account. Generally, open source solutions, especially small to medium scale companies, they prefer open source solutions like Apache, MySQL to build their web applications, because .NET and Microsoft SQL Server, they are proprietary in nature, but they provide you very advanced functionalities that may not be available exactly in open source technologies, and that's why they are charging you money for that. So what are the possible hosting services available? Now there are two options. Web applications can be hosted within the enterprise, and we call that as in-house hosting, or they could be hosted on some external service provider who are specialized in these services. Okay, so these two options we have. Along with this decision whether you go in-house or go to some company that provides you these services, you also have to take into consideration the hosting cost and domain cost. Okay, remember, you are the developer, you define the program, you are able to define the logical design of your program, and you started coding your program depending upon the language which is required for that task. But in parallel, you need to take these things into account as well, because it will affect your program, whether the hosting would be done in-house or it would be to external providers. You need to talk to your client regarding these things, so that you can get a better picture where eventually your application will end up. Okay. Cost, every domain has some cost associated with it. So whenever you purchase a domain, what happens? That domain will get registers with the domain name servers. There are few domain name servers in the world that are basically specialized for these purposes. So whenever you purchase a domain, it gets registered on those web servers, and against that domain name there will be an IP attached to it. So whenever router basically routes your request, it go to DNS server, DNS server resolves the address, and then it will redirect to the specific server where information is residing. Okay, so domains are very critical. Their cost associated with them is very critical. That needs to be taken into consideration as well. So hosting service providers, especially the external, they come up with different packages. Some of them may provide you hosting for only .NET applications. Some may provide hosting only for PHP, or some may provide for both. So it depends. You have to identify if your client says you end up with external providers like ABC, what sort of services they provide. If they are not hosting PHP applications, and clients wants you to host your business application eventually over there, then you cannot use PHP. So it definitely will affect your selection of language, choice of language as well. So what is being supported on the by the external providers, you may need to go and use that language for development. So there are various packages. So if client already has a host, you have to adhere what host is supporting for. Accordingly, you can select your services. So these questions basically, if you get in touch with the client as soon as possible, it not only helps you in order to better understand how you need to plan your things, it also helps the client in order to reinvestigate what are the available options to them. If external service provider, hosting service providers are not suitable solution, he may go and opt for in-house hosting. Okay, and so you need to indulge with client as soon as possible, so that you along with the client are in better position to devise a strategy to come up with the arrangement that can help the eventually the business to achieve its overall goal to increase its share in the market. Okay, so I think we can take 10-minute break, and then we'll start with internal hostings and what needs we need to take care of. if we are going for internal hosting. So any question? No. Okay, so we can take 10 minutes break then.